All right, today we're gonna talk about Durkheim, and maybe we can do this in one, but it's probably going to take a few more videos. My wife has kindly decided to redecorate my office again, and so now I have devil horns. I kind of like that. I may have to change that for work Zooms, however. Uh, okay, so uh, as we started at the beginning of the semester, uh, the Holy Trinity in sociology, or at least when I was going to school, was Marx, Durkheim, Weber. We spent a lot of time talking about Marx, and what I wanted you to get out of Marx was a fairly mechanical system that the economy drives everything. It drives culture, it drives religion, it drives values. Um, and he had this model of a system whose internal contradictions and problems were what would eventually be the weaknesses that brought that system down. So, so that's all well and good. The other thing about Marx is, and sociologists call this conflict theory, is he's looking for the friction, the problem in society, and where those problems are arising from and what their effect is. So you could say Marx is studying what pulls societies apart. Durkheim is asking similar questions, but he's asking it in a different direction. So most of Durkheim's analysis is going to uh, circle around what holds societies together, right? And so in this first one, I want to talk a little bit about organic and mechanic solidarity, and that will lead us into division of labor. Okay, so um, Durkheim starts by analyzing some of the ethnographies and reports from uh, world travelers coming in about the primitive, quote unquote, people of the rest of the world. Durkheim himself is a French sociologist, and yeah, so he's living in what he sees as the cradle of civilization, and he's curious about how people around the world live. Now, one of the things that stands out to him as he's reading these secondhand accounts of tribal people, and let's make you a little more even, tribal people and whatever. We don't really have the language to talk about these folks nowadays. In Durkheim's time, you would have talked about primitive people, simple people, even prehistoric people. And there's an assumption of superiority. We, the Westerns, are the civilized ones, and the simple people would eventually evolve their culture to be where we are. And the problem with that is that nowadays we don't look at people living a tribal life and say you're simple, you're quaint, you're behind technologically. We just don't use that language of progress. We would use a language of difference. But in order to understand, and there's value to that, they're not lesser humans because they're living a different life than we Westerners are, and we shouldn't assume that they are. That said, you really do have to understand that notion of progress and that notion of cultural superiority that those old guys were dealing with in order for the any of this to really make sense. So at any time during this course, when I'm talking about tribal people or quote unquote primitive people, understand that I'm trying to explain the way these folks thought about that, and absolutely wholly agree with the modern conception that they're not worse or less, that they're just different. And in some ways, their worlds are going to have positives compared to ours, and our worlds are going to have positives compared to theirs. Doing videos in July and August in Macon, Georgia. One of the positives of modern life that I appreciate is air conditioning. All right, caveats aside, Durkheim's looking at these quote unquote primitive people, and one of the things that he's noticing is that for the most part, people living in an old fashioned society like that have a fairly shared understanding of the world. A lot of what we, well, let me back up, scratch that. They have a shared understanding of the world. And when Durkheim's thinking about that, what does he mean? He means essentially that they share the same worldview, they share the same sense of religion and mythology, they share the same sense of morality, they share the same sense of just how things are supposed to work. And in that world, people people get along because that's who they are. If I mean, it's not a universal, but I'm always a little bit struck by how many of traditional people, you know, their word for their tribe is the same as the word for man, and everybody else is something else. And if that's, you know, your conception of the world, then the reason you help out your people is because they're your people, and you don't worry quite so much about other folks in the world. In fact, they may well be a threat. Now, when Durkheim looked at the modern world, however, and you know, the turn of the century, 1900s France would have been a very, very cosmopolitan place. The European expansion had been going on for 300-400 years already. You know, the world was round. France was, you know, everyone. They were not. They would have been very cosmopolitan. You know, 1900 Paris would have been not that different from like our understanding of New York. People from the world came there to do business. They came there to do art and fashion. They came there to do knowledge and learning. And even in our discourse, in our language, we've got this notion of lingua franca. France was so important to the world that in the same way today's kind of language you have to speak if you're going to do business on the global scale is English, in the past it may have been French. And so the lingua franca is a term for the global language everyone needs to know, and it's the lingua franca because it's the language of French. And so Durkheim's world would have been cosmopolitan. There would have been languages from all over the world. There would have been religions from all over the world. France is a stratified society. You would have people who were very, very poor, who were living very different lives than people who were very, very wealthy. And so, you know, Durkheim would look at that world and compare it to, again, what he's thinking of as tribal societies. And he's thinking, okay, so on this hand, you've got people who are living in small groups, a couple hundred people. They share the same mindset, same morality, same religion, same understanding of the world. And France in 1900, where you've got people who don't share the same religion, don't share the same mindset, don't share the same morality. They really don't necessarily share anything in common. And so it's clear that here you take care of these people because they're your people. But over here, what holds this together at all, right? And if you delve into that a little bit deeper, you know, as sociologists, when we look at religion, we're not worried about the ultimate truth of it. That's a theologian's problem or a pastor's problem. We just care about the social effects. But if you delve into um, what people think the implications of the universal truths of their religions are, um, if you're my religion, of course, there's a place in heaven for you. But if you're one of the other religions, I'm sorry, you're just wrong, and you're going to that hot, fiery place, and there's not much I can do with you. Well, if my assumption about my neighbor is that they're facing eternal damnation for living a different life and going to a different church, why should I care about them at all, right? A very, very different picture than a tribal society where my neighbor may well be related, shares the same understanding of everything, right? Like, if this guy is going to if this guy's going to the wrong church and isn't favored by God and is spending his afterlife in Hades, then it really doesn't. Why would I spend any time worrying about him at all? And the answer is I don't really, but he's still my neighbor and I still deal with him. So Durkheim's question is what's holding this together, and he comes up with this idea of what he calls mechanic and organic solidarity, and it's based on the division of labor. Okay, so and for me, this was one that always confused me. I always got it backwards, even into grad school, because in Durkheim's eyes, the order of evolution is mechanic first and organic second, which to me sounds backwards. The natural world was here, and then we humans came and created mechanical things, right? But that's not actually what he's getting at. His distinction between mechanic and organic is that a mechanic system is fairly simple, right? I mean, modern automatic transmission is pretty complex, but compared to the organic workings of a cockroach, it's not even anywhere close, right? So the mechanic solidarity is the simple one. The organic solidarity is the more complex, more nuanced, much more evolved, if you will, than the simple mechanic one. Okay, so the division of labor, the way Durkheim understood it, comes down to really what's your role in society? What do you do, right? Yeah, and recall from the beginning of this, for Marx, what you do in society is directly related to making a living. And not just like, making a living, but in fact making food, clean water, sewage treatment, houses, and then everything else that goes along with that. And so it's good to keep in mind that, for Durkheim, he's thinking similar things. So what do? Well, if you're in these simple, again, quote unquote, tribal societies, there's not actually all that much differentiated work to be done. You do have to get the food, you have to hunt, you have to gather, you have to prepare, you have to store. And some people are going to be better at that, some people are going to be worse at those different things, I'm sure. You have to find a way to make shelter. You have to do art, you have to do medicine, you have to do religion. All these different things have to get done. But for the most part, for Durkheim, in a traditional society, a quote-unquote simple society, that most everyone's going to know most of what they need to make something work, right? So if you took a villager out of one of those traditional societies and dropped him or her into an environment that they were sort of familiar with, they're not going to starve. They know what to eat, what plants they can eat, what to avoid. They're going to know where to find water. They're going to know which plants are medicinal. and they're going to be fine until they get back to their group. And in those societies, um, this comes from the ethnographers, the anthropologists. The biggest, most common difference is a sex role difference. Um, Quite often, the men and women had distinctly different roles. That was just the way it was, and but other than that, not a ton of differentiation. Just about everybody knew how to do most of the stuff that needed to get done in that society, right? When you compare that to the modern world, um, you know, I have not eaten a fish that I've caught in 20 years. I mean, maybe I could, but well, not maybe I could. If I had to support myself through my own fishing, um, it it wouldn't go well, right? I could say I could, but the truth of the matter is, where am I going to find a pound of protein out of a fish per day for me and everyone in my family? That's just it's not really going to happen. That would be a terrible weight loss plan. Similarly with water, I don't know about you, but water comes from the sink. Yes, the alkymulgi is there, and I'm sure their water is well, it's there, but I ain't drinking it until it goes through the treatment facility, right? Same thing with sewage, yeah, maybe in the old days you could use an outhouse or a latrine, but I'm not digging a hole in the backyard. Um, you know, when it comes to the things that need to happen for me to have a actual physical livable environment, I don't actually do most of anything. Hell, I don't even paint the house. I let my wife do that. If I do it, it's going to end up ugly. So, what do I do, right? Well, I stand here and make videos for you, put together a class on the computer. I have my day job, and none of those look too much like, well, don't worry about that. So that's what I do, and then they give me money, and with that money, I go to the grocery store and I buy fish or hamburgers, right? I pay my water bill so that um, I have clean water coming out of the taps. Although I do have to say that Making Bib is pretty quick on turning it off, because when my auto pay card expired, the only way I found out was I had no water. Who knew, right? Um, so so I do my thing, they pay me, and then I use that money to go pay other people, right? And when you think about our society, when you think about the division of labor, our society is very highly differentiated. Um, just think about campus there. The person that does network IT isn't the same as the person who programs Banner, and they aren't the same people that collect your tuition. That's the bursar, and they're not the same people that maintain the records for the classes you're going to. That's the registrar. And there's a finance person who overlooks the entire university, and there's a whole department of foundation whose job it is to fundraise um, over and above what tuition in the state pays, right? So there are hundreds of different jobs just within the university, and that's to say nothing of everything else in the world. So that's the division of labor. And compare that to just an interesting note on the sex difference. In our world, the sex difference matters a whole lot less. Um, there are still gender variations between jobs, but it's not weird at all to have a female truck driver and a male nurse, right? It was a little less common, 20 years ago to have those those jobs filled by the opposite gender. But even 100 years ago, no one would have said a woman couldn't drive a truck. I don't know, maybe it wouldn't happen. Um, and so the gender division of labor starts to shrink in modern societies, while the actual level of differentiation explodes in modern societies. Okay, so understanding that division of labor, understanding that we don't live in a world where we all get along, and that's not to say that there wasn't friction in simpler societies, pre-modern societies, but it does mean they shared that mindset, right? Um, so we live in a world where we don't have to share anything above adherence to the law in terms of like shared morality, if you will. Um, we don't have to like each other, but we need each other economically to participate in this great big thing called the economy, which we use to meet our needs to live, right? Um, so, for Durkheim, the mechanic solidarity of, again, quote unquote, simple societies was this shared worldview. And that included, like I said, religion, morality, worldview, understanding how the world worked. And they didn't have that much, that deep of an economy when it came to differentiation of roles to meet our living needs. That's mechanic solidarity because it's simpler, right? Organic solidarity, more evolved, more nuanced, much more complex, is this world where what holds us together is that economic requirement. Um, I don't need to go to church with the butcher. Um, I don't need to even agree on fundamental morality with the butcher. All we need to do is agree that money is green. And I pay him for hamburger, he gives me hamburger, right? And the same thing with you guys. You don't need to agree with me politically, morally, religiously, in the least. In fact, what I think doesn't matter, what you think doesn't matter. All you need from me is to deliver a social theory class. You can get a credit, and you can go on and live your life. And the school will give me money, and I'll go give it to the butcher, right? So it's the shared need of a modern, highly differentiated economy that holds modern societies together. That's the organic solidarity, and both of those are resting upon that division of labor and the level of division of labor in the different societies. All right. There's more, but I'm going to kill this one because we're at 23, and we'll see you in a moment.